This video is brought to you by Blessed Be God Boutique, maker of Catholic fashionable apparel, handmade accessories, and more. A little more than a week ago, Return to Tradition was the first place on YouTube to present the news about the FBI memo that had been leaked by a whistleblower that aimed the wrath of that agency squarely on traditional Catholics. That story continues to evolve, though oddly the story has kind of fallen back into the background of reporting. And that's probably at least partially due to the story not really surprising anyone. I mean, were you really surprised when you heard the news? I received numerous messages from people saying that they knew of strange men who showed up at their parishes and were clearly sent by the Bureau or some similar agency going back a few years. Truthfully, this has been going on for a long time, and thankfully, it doesn't look like really that many people were actually surprised by the things that the government has backed down from when the policy was reported on. We can all see that they simply withdrew the memo and probably slapped an agent or two on the wrist for a lack of discretion. No one actually took the FBI backing down at face value. Now, the best news about this seems to be that some state governments have issued requests for formal reports on this story from the FBI, demanding to get some answers on why they would target religious groups, especially ones known for being the most quiet and law-abiding of any group you can name. But the responses from the U.S. bishops have been, we'll say, less than good, unfortunately, and that is a problem. What is the point of being a bishop other than generally to protect the faithful, to not only lead the faith, but to also stand up for them? So let's look at all these responses to date. Let's start with the state governments. We get the story from LifeSite, who seems to have been the leading outlet following this story in particular closely. So, headline: Virginia Attorney General leads 19 states in demanding FBI come clean about anti-Catholic memo, church spying. The Attorney General of Virginia and those of 19 other states have demanded that the FBI immediately cease the targeting of Catholics and produce, quote, all materials related to its recently leaked anti-Catholic memo. Now, Virginia is such a mixed bag state politically, and this does show you that participating in local politics is the most important kind you can participate in. It should be a reminder of that. Even if these state law enforcement chiefs aren't themselves Catholic, we need more people like this in these key positions, defending our interests against an increasingly wicked government. And remember, there's 19 of them, and, well, you'll see they all slant one way in their political leanings, unfortunately. The Attorney General of Virginia wrote to his federal counterpart, as well as to the head of the FBI itself, for clarity on the story. Don't expect a response from them, though. So from the article, quote, Friday's letter demanded that the FBI first, quote, immediately and unequivocally order the agency personnel not to target Americans based on their religious beliefs and practices. The 20 attorneys general also specifically, quote, requested a full explanation of the document's origins, documents related to its implementation, and information on how Virginia's Catholics have already been affected by the document, including on, quote, whether the FBI has begun infiltrating houses of worship in conflict with the FBI's internal guidelines. While the FBI has retracted the document following intense backlash over its contents, Meares, that's the Attorney General there, and his undersigned attorneys general emphasized that they remain unpersuaded by the FBI's, quote, damage control efforts, end quote. A good forceful statement, and it's good that they are reminding them that they're not actually, taken by the, backpedaling on the memo itself. I hope court action follows when the Bureau inevitably fails to act accordingly. The letter is co-signed by the Attorney Generals of Texas, West Virginia, Utah, South Carolina, Tennessee, Ohio, Nebraska, Missouri, Montana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Iowa, Kansas, Indiana, Idaho, Georgia, Arkansas, Alaska, and Alabama. All of those names have one thing in common. They're all from the same party, which is unfortunate, but obviously not surprising. The ideological secular media has stories that I've covered in the past that paint those who pray the rosary as some extreme threat to the social order, including an article in The Atlantic from last year that I reported on. That article was explicitly cited in the FBI's original memo. This is an ideological battle going on, as well as a supernatural one, and we should all recognize the reality of the situation. But the bishops probably aren't recognizing that, or worse, they agree with the Bureau to some degree. A few U.S. bishops have spoken out against the news story, but the sad reality is that most of them have remained silent, including the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which the government has relations with. Headline from LifeSite: USCCB, Diocese of Richmond silent on leaked FBI memo targeting radical Latin Mass Catholics. While 20 U.S. attorneys general and a slew of non-Catholics have condemned the FBI's Bombshell memo targeting Latin Mass goers, comments from the USCCB and the Diocese of Richmond have been conspicuously absent. Now, that story's a bit dated because since it was published, Bishop Nestout of Richmond, Virginia, has actually released a statement, and I'll get to that in a moment. So they have actually, to correct the record, since reported on it. But let's focus on the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which is busy with its own continental synodal meeting, and I intend to report on that in the coming days. From the article, quote, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, as well as the Diocese of Richmond, have remained conspicuously silent on Wednesday's release of the Bombshell memorandum from the FBI's Richmond, Virginia office, declaring that radical traditionalist Catholic ideology makes it sound so cool, is a magnet for really bad people. Both organizations have neglected to mention in any capacity the memo, which has already been decried as, quote, anti-Catholic by Virginia's Attorney General. LifeSite News has repeatedly reached out to the USCCB and the Diocese of Richmond with requests for comment with no response as of publishing, end quote. And again, I'll follow that with Bishop Nestout of Richmond, Virginia has released a statement. It's not exactly the most forceful statement, really, but it's decent. I suspect Bishop Nestout is the kind of Virginian much more comfortable with the sort of Nova, Northern Virginia culture of Virginia. If you live in Virginia, then you know what I'm talking about. But let me know if my assessment on Bishop Nestout is correct. Is he more of a Nova, or is he more kind of like the rest of Virginia? Here's the essential part of his statement, though. He focuses on, first, the FSSP, which is to be expected, and says that following the Church's traditional teachings on values and worship is not something that makes someone some weird extreme type. He then goes into Vatican II values about religious liberty, something which, by the way, the Church was not in favor of until the Council and had explicitly rejected it with the full force of the papacy. It was listed in the syllabus of errors, actually. Anyway, from Bishop Nestout's statement, quote, the leaked document should be troubling and offensive to all communities of faith, as well as all Americans. I am grateful for the Virginia Attorney General and 19 Attorneys General who have called upon the government to publicly release all materials related to the production of this memo. If evidence of extreme things exists, it should be rooted out, but not at the expense of religious freedom. A preference for traditional forms of worship and holding closely to the Church's teachings on marriage, family, the flesh, and the dignity of the human person does not acquaint with being an extreme type. Religious freedom is an important matter acknowledged every June by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB, in which my brother bishops and I value and celebrate Religious Freedom Week. Anyway, most recently, on January 16th, 2023, the U.S. celebrated Religious Freedom Day with USCCB Chair for Religious Liberty, Cardinal Timothy M. Dolan, noting, quote, there is no freedom without the truth. It is my hope we get to the truth of the memo published last week. Our faith and our church instruct us to be a people of peace and to uphold human dignity. We do not condone violence. As Pope Francis wrote in his 2017 letter for the celebration of World Day of Peace, violence profanes the name of God, and the name of God cannot be used to justify violence. Peace alone is holy. End quote. The statement reads a little like he's trying to reassure the Bureau that Catholics are in fact nice Americans who just want to get along with everyone. That's his prerogative to take a position like that, I guess, and I'm happy that he wrote something publicly, and I hope that LifeSite will at least update that article. At the time that I looked putting this together, they haven't yet. But aside from Bishop Nestout, the only other bishop who has spoken out, to my knowledge, has been Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, who used the typically more strident language we'd expect from one of the better bishops in addressing this problem. And it is a problem. But honestly, the bigger problem is that the USCCB hasn't issued a statement, not a formal statement of any kind, at least not at the time of the production of this episode. What is the point of a national bishops' conference if the bishops cannot collectively issue a statement in defense of the faith and the church when it's needed? What's the point at all of having such a body that the government recognizes and has relations with if that body won't do the most basic things of all, which is to defend the faithful against overreach by that same government when it's needed? I don't understand this. The sad thing is this. If this was a memo about some other religious group, say, I don't know if this was in 2023, but say 2003, during the W era, I suspect the USCCB would have been very vocal about it. I'm sure Ted McCarrick would have said some really vocal things. I'm right about that too. But when it comes to defending Catholics, too many bishops are too afraid of saying the uncomfortable thing. It's revealing, it really is. Now, I'm curious what you think about this story. Do you see anything coming from these state attorney generals demanding answers? Or are we talking about federal officials who are so far gone down the rabbit hole of corruption that, frankly, not only will they not get a response, the bishops not get a response at all, but all this attention could cause more problems for faithful Catholics? Or is this all just a nothing burger, as they say? Well, let me know what you think of this story in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot, too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.